Hi.
Hi guys. So we're just waiting for. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yep. I'm just waiting for Niemat now. I think I see her walking in the doors, and then we have a room booked downstairs, so we'll go there. I'm gonna mute myself for just a second as we move, because otherwise it's gonna be like all over the place.
Can you tell us more about the current protest movement that began in December, and what are those protesters' demands?
Well, thank you so much, and I thank Stan for organizing this, and thank you for the opportunity. Speaking about the historical roles of al-Bashir regime in Sudan, or and the atrocities that are happening in Sudan, it's like first and foremost, al-Bashir regime is responsible of all the atrocities that are happening in Sudan. And to speak about the history of this regime, this is a regime that came to power by coup, a military coup in 1989. And as soon as they held the power in Sudan, they toppled a democratically elected government. After that, immediately in the beginning of 1990s, they started creating a project called the Project of Islamization of the Sudanese society, even though they are Muslim, but because they are not extreme, they are not affiliated with Muslim Brotherhood, so they are trying to spread in political Islam, and they immediately launched a jihad or holy war against the people of South Sudan, who were fighting for their right and demanding to be treated as equal as all the Sudanese citizens. So in that war, there has been over 2 million people lost their lives. In addition to forcing people to abandon their homes, living in internal displaced, living in the forest, living in the neighboring countries for years. Until today, South Sudan is still suffering the consequences of what they have been through in Sudan, and unfortunately, at the end of the day, ended by splitting or forcing the Sudanese to lose one of the most important part of our land, but also our people. Secondly, in mid-1990s, the government of Sudan has heavily involved with the jihadist extremist group around the world, and they start like working actively recruiting and inviting them to Sudan, and they hosted so many dangerous, one of them including Bin Laden. That has led Sudan to isolation. The U.S. has imposed sanctions against Sudan because of that, their involvement, because it has threatened the U.S. national security, but also the global security because of their support for jihadi groups. Before we can resolve that, then in late 1990s, early 2000s, they have militarized, equipped, and trained an Arab militia called Janjaweed, and they launched a genocidal attack, which is a scorched earth campaign against the indigenous African in Darfur that resulted in genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. More than 4 million people have been forced to leave their homes. And in only the first 2 years, by 2006, the UN has reported that over 300,000 people have been killed. But by today, people on the ground believing that a million or more have been killed because the conflict has not ended, and the UN has not been conducting any report of deaths or sexual violence and any other casualties. So the people of Darfur have been forced not only to live in camps inside their own country, but also to flee to the refugee camps where Katie have their project in eastern Chad. The largest refugee number is in Chad. In addition to Ghana, Kenya, South Sudan, Syria, Jordan, Libya, name it. So many countries, the people of Darfur right now is living in deplorable conditions, and some of them they ended up in a crisis-affected countries like Syria, like Libya, then they have to migrate again and again. and many more are living in Egypt for years who have not been settled until today. Uh, then after that, the international community has mobilized in the early days against the government of Sudan. However, the government of Sudan has managed to divide the Sudanese people across ethnic, geographic, and political lines, and as well as dividing the international community based on their political interests, but also based on regional and international and global interests. So, with that being said, even though President al-Bashir is wanted from 2009 up to date by the international community for the crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed in Darfur, President Bashir is still free and is still continue to pursue his genocidal policy. In 2011, President al-Bashir's government has launched attacks against two more regions that are supposed to be part of the comprehensive peace agreement that have brought or granted secession for South Sudan. On purpose, President al-Bashir kept Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, and then also Abyei, because of this is an oil-rich region, to bargain the government of South Sudan, but also to bargain the international community. And since then, the people of Nuba Mountain and Blue Nile, there has been nearly 1 million internal displaced and refugees who are, most of them are living in caves right now, and also across the border to South Sudan and Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, and name it. These people have not returned to their homes as of today. And as not only in these crisis-affected areas, Darfur, Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, in Eastern Sudan, there has been fighting between the government and the people of Eastern Sudan. They have been given a peace. Right now, they are not in peace. They are not in war. The people could die of malnutrition, hunger, diseases, and the government doesn't care about the people there. Now, speaking about the protest, you cannot speak about the current situation without connecting the dots to the historical role played by President al-Bashir. As I just spoke about the crisis in Darfur, Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, this has led to displacing over 10 million of the country's population. These are the people who have been farmers, herders, and they are working on agroforestry, producing more than 60% of the total national income, contributing more than 60%. They are contributing more than 70% in agricultural products, including food and other commodities. By forcing these people to become refugees or internally displaced, is stopping the production. And so most of the country's population turned into consuming versus producing. So even those who have not been impacted by the crisis in Darfur, Nuba Mountain, or Blue Nile, in the center, there has been suffering as a lack of very, very basic needs. Not only basic needs, but also the infrastructure services. There is no health care, there is no clean water, there is nothing. And then Sudan's economy has been severely impacted because of the overwhelming majority of the Sudanese resources are going to purchase of weapons or military budget. The largest budget in Sudan is military budget, which makes up about 80% of the total the country's budget. So that has led to imbalance in production in the national income and reflected in the daily life of the people of Sudan. When the people of Darfur was under attack, the government was propagating that these are people who are against the government and against the state, and that's why we are fighting them to protect our state. The same thing with Nuba Mountain and Blue Nile. But now, the suffering has entered into every single family's house, and the people of Sudan from across different regions came to realize that the problem is not the people of Darfur, not the people of South Sudan, not the people of Kordofan or Blue Nile. It is the government in the center that have been doing this to the people of Sudan. And the remaining resources, the government has been using corruption and stolen all the money to enrich themselves and their families. So they open accounts in foreign countries. They go build mansions in Dubai, in Malaysia, in so many other countries, and they have been putting their money outside of Sudan. So they are stealing, using corruption. They're not even investing it in Sudan to benefit the Sudanese people by in direct or indirect way. So then, with the economic crisis, there has been lack of monetary value. Like there is no money in the banks. People go to ATM machines and they could not get teachers, lawyers, doctors. They can't get their salaries. People who are serving people on every day basis, they can't get their salaries. Students can't go to school. We, ordinary people, they cannot earn income or survive. Things like food commodities became scarce. Like people cannot buy bread. Can you imagine? People cannot even buy bread. With your own money, you cannot buy bread. So people have starved, and fuel prices hit skyrocketingly rose, and then people all of a sudden realized that the problem is the government. So the protest started in December 19 in a small city of Adbara, and then in Al Damazin, and then after that it spread across Sudan. And the first protest people were speaking about the scarcity of food and the basic needs, but all of a sudden everyone comes to realize that this is not about food, it is not about fuel, it is about the continuous violation of human rights of the Sudanese people. It is the government that used the resources and every effort to destroy its own people. And it is the government that has divided and dehumanized the people of Sudan. And people are protesting and demanding President al-Bashir to step down, and they are demanding change in the government. They are asking the government of Sudan to peacefully step down and lead the people of Sudan so that they can lead an interim period of 3 to 4 years so that they can be able to help the people who have been displaced and impacted by war to peacefully and voluntarily return to their homes, to compensate these people, improve human rights and economic condition in the country, infrastructure, improve relations with regional and international bodies, and then will create a constitution that will allow the path for free and fair election after the end of the interim period, whereby all Sudanese can be free to contest the election, and whoever that the Sudanese people choose, then they can rule the country, and people will be willing to work with them. So, but the government's response was brutal. They want to do everything but keep their power. So shooting people, using live ammunition, using tear gas, and arrest and torture have been reported. There has been over 50 people reported killed, thousands of people who have been arrested. A few of them have been released just to show the government to show that, oh, we did something. But many more who are still under detention, they have not been charged, they have not been tried as of today. Lawyers, doctors, they shot at hospitals, inside hospitals, whereby doctors volunteer to treat those who have been wounded during the protest. Women, young people as you, students from different universities have been arrested. As of today, they are still in detention. And there was a prominent human rights lawyer who was at our conference last October. He was arrested and picked from his own office without doing anything wrong. So the situation right now is that the government trying to oppress the protest by killing, giving full authority to the people, to the forces, the government forces, the military and the police, to use the force to quell or suppress the protest. The people are determined. They are coming out and they are telling the government that they are not backing down until the regime is down. So recently, the government of Sudan did what? They went out and declared a state of emergency for a year. So they're intending to stay for a year long, whereby al-Bashir can modify the constitution and allow himself to run for election again. And the people of Sudan were so angered by this decision. Not only declare a state of emergency, they fire all the civil leaders, including state governors, ministers, state ministers, and national ministers, and appointed military people to lead the country and give them open orders that to arrest and kill and shoot so that they can keep the ruling going. So people, again, they came out and they continue to protest and continue to tell the government that their demands are just and they will not back down and they will not compromise until this government is changed. So the issue right now the people of Sudan are facing is that the government of Sudan, along this history of committing atrocities in Sudan, has been emboldened and strengthened by some of the regional and international players, and also the dynamics around Sudan has changed. In the recent years, government of Sudan was isolated back then after the ICC indictment, the International Criminal Court indicted al-Bashir, was isolated, was not welcome in the international forums. Now, in recent years, the European Union started a new collaboration that they said to so-called advance or to curb the flow of African refugees to Europe by collaborating with the government of al-Bashir. That granted them in the first installment 100 million euro from the European Union for Sudan. Can you believe that? To help to stop the flow of African refugees to Europe. And this is the country that produced the most vulnerable refugees to the world. European Union should be ashamed. They should be holding Sudan accountable for forcing people to become refugees in the first place. And then to do it, to stop the refugees who are coming from other countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and other countries who are passing through Libya, Sudan to go to Europe. These are the people who are persecuted in their own countries. A man who is responsible of genocide, can you believe that you can trust them for protecting the rights of these other people? No, of course, but that is the world that we live in today. And then in 2016, the United States government decided to lift sanctions. It was in the last days of the Obama administration. And then the current administration followed their footsteps, and then they went ahead, and in 2017, they completely lifted sanctions, and right now negotiating normalization in their way to delist Sudan from the terrorist-sponsored countries. So the challenges are really huge, and I will stop here, and then we'll talk to you about what needs to be done, what we can do to change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Niemat. So now I'm going to ask KDJ 2 questions. I'll give you 10 minutes. So first, could you speak about iACT's work with Sudanese refugees in Chad? And second, how have internally displaced people in Sudan been affected by regime policies over the years? What are their hopes in the current moment in Sudan?
Yeah, thank you, Niemat, for that amazing summary. You packed a lot in that short time. So great work, and thank you for sharing. iACT has been traveling to the refugee camps in eastern Chad, where there's about currently 330,000 refugees from Sudan, from Darfur. We've been traveling there since 2005. Our team has made over 30 trips to the camps. And in the beginning, it was to collect stories and amplify the voices of the displaced and share them with diasporas, partnering with organizations like Niemat and what was then before Save Darfur and United to End Genocide, and really amplifying their voices and their hopes and their dreams, especially when very contingent policies would come out, whether the U.S. should ask for a no-fly zone, not ask for one, whether the ICC should have gone forward with an indictment because then humanitarian aid organizations were kicked out. The displaced community, the refugee community in eastern Chad is quite far away from anything and quite disconnected. And so at the beginning, we were really amplifying their voices through storytelling. And that evolved into, as the conflict continued, as Niemat said, it started in 2003, but around 2005, 2006, 2007, attention started to decrease massively. The killing didn't. The genocide, Bashir continued in targeting the Darfuris and expanded that out to divide and conquer the rest of the country as well. But as the media spotlight left, so did a lot of the large aid organizations. And in around 2010, we were there in refugee camp Gozamer, which is one of the southern refugee camps in Eastern Chad. And the refugees started asking us for help. They needed early childhood education. They needed livelihood solutions. And at the beginning, we said, well, we're activists, but we'll try to figure out what we can do for you. And so we really took our modeling of listening to the refugees themselves and asking experts in the fields that they wanted more experience and capacity in to partner and connect, which is what we would do with our activism in amplifying the voices. And so really we reached out to early childhood education experts, trauma experts, mindfulness and mindful movement, yoga experts, experts who worked in sports for children, sports for peace building. And we worked with the refugee communities to create our Little Ripples early childhood education program, our Refugees United Soccer Academy, our Lead with Empathy, Leadership, and Human Rights curriculum. And all of our programs in Eastern Chad are led by Darfuris themselves. We don't leave any international staff on the ground. We have about 170 refugee employees across 8 camps in Eastern Chad, and we serve about 24,000 kids. We've trained over 400 of the Darfuris, who all come from different tribes, but all of them share really the same hope. They still want to return home to Sudan. That's been the hope from the very beginning once we started going in 2005, and it's still to this day what they hope for, and they fight tooth and nail for that. Unfortunately, the humanitarian aid and services system doesn't afford a lot for humans to exist within it. It's a really dehumanizing way of going about providing aid. And so iACT tries to really go in and disrupt that. And one of the ways that we do that is letting the refugees themselves run the programs. They all look quite different in each camp because they're really owned by the community themselves. And now those programs have expanded to other refugee settings in other areas. And this year they'll be expanding programs to new camps in Eastern Chad without iACT's presence. They'll be doing it all on their own because now they know how to do it, and they know how to run it, and they know how to meet the needs of their own community. So we're really excited for that. Our dream is actually to have a humanitarian summit in Eastern Chad, so big players can listen to refugees themselves about how dehumanizing the system is and what their recommendations are to change it. So the second question, how have internally displaced people in Sudan been affected by the regime policies over the years? They're quite affected by it. They have always wanted to return home. We've had refugee families that we have known for a long time return back into Darfur. Some end up going back to Eastern Chad. Some remain. We just got a message a few days ago from Adam, a longtime family, a father of about 12 kids that we've been in touch with. And he just says inside Sudan, it's worse than he's ever seen it, worse than it was in 2003. I think one of the main ways that policies by the Sudanese government have really affected this community is that about 2008, there was, up until that point, the governments of Chad and Sudan really disliked each other. So al-Bashir and Deby butted heads. They funded the rebel groups inside each other's countries to then attack those governments. We were there when there was an attempted coup in Chad in February 2008, which was kind of the last coup attempt by Chadian rebels. After that, in 2009, al-Bashir and Deby decided to make peace with each other. They decided that it was more strategic for the region if they could work together and be the corrupt leaders, that the best corrupt leaders that they could possibly be. As Niemat says, these two governments are kleptocrats. They take the money from the people, and they use illicit funding channels to build homes in Australia for $3 million, or to start a company that's not really a company in Libya for millions of dollars. And that's how they siphon off the funding. So Chad and Sudan have very much been in cahoots with that. The second way that the relationship works between the two is that Chad wants to get rid of their refugee problem. And Sudan wants to get rid of this blemish, right, that they say is now over, and the Darfur genocide is over, and everything is fine and everything inside Sudan is peaceful. And so we want to get rid of it. So about starting in 2013, they got rid of the UN peacekeeping mission that was on the border. And they decided that there would be a joint Chadian and Sudanese army or military force on the border, which is a very empty border. It's not like it's an official crossing or anything. It's a desert. But the military leaders that were installed on Sudan's side were the Janjaweed leaders who went into the original villages, killing the community members and forcing them to cross the border to Chad to begin with. So you can imagine when these security forces come into the camps to walk around and assert their strength, how traumatic and dehumanizing that can be for their community. So the force that's supposed to be charged with protecting them is actually the force who once killed them and many members of their families. The next phase of that has been that they have convinced UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency, that it's safe inside Sudan, even to this day. So we were there in November, and even then, Sudan was trying to say, it's totally safe to come back, like repatriate them. And Chad was saying to UNHCR, we don't want a refugee problem anymore, so send them back. And UNHCR, being UNHCR, said, okay, we'll help facilitate this. And so again, Chadian government leaders, leaders from Bashir's regime, so the military leaders who are part of the Janjaweed or the RSF, who have been continually conducting killings inside Darfur, but also in the other parts that Niemat mentioned in Blue Nile and Abyei and Nuba Mountains, plus United Nations representatives have been going camp by camp and asking people, paying them to try to go back into Sudan. And this still continues. We just had a check-in with our partner on the ground, Jesuit Refugee Services, and we got a WhatsApp message from one of our leaders, Tarbosh, and there's UNHCR is still going around with Chadian and Sudanese representatives from the government saying it's safe to return. It's safe to return, you need to go back. Obviously, the refugees in Eastern Chad, a majority of them are very fearful of their life. Chad is not going to offer asylum. It's not like other countries where once you enter into an international border and you ask for asylum, they have a legal responsibility to accept you. Chad has an international legal responsibility, but they don't have an asylum process as we do in the United States or even in Greece. Where Niemat was speaking to the influx of refugees into the European Union. They're crossing from Libya into Greece, and it's been going on quite a lot since 2012. And I was just in Greece, and I actually met both a Chadian and a Sudanese man who made it through Libya into these camps, and to the islands, and then into these camps in northern Greece. And they felt the effects. They got brought back by the Libyan government 3 times. The Sudanese government tried to hold the Chadian guy, held him in a detention center for 4 months. So it's the combination of the different policies and the emboldenment of the Sudanese government, not just by the European Union, but as Niemat says, since Obama lifted sanctions in 2016, there's been this very large push, heavily funded by the Sudanese government. It's lobbied for them to come off of the state-sponsored terrorism list. And so that is something that, as activists, we really do need to push to make sure that we don't take them off that list. It's kind of the last thing we have to hold any leverage over them.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much both for all of your insight and all of the information. It's been really useful. I think if it's okay with you guys now, we'll move into like a question and answer period. If anyone has a question, feel free to type it in the chat. There should be like a little dot at the bottom, and you can type a question. For the sake of time, we might not get to all of them if there are a bunch. So if you do type a question that isn't answered, I'm sure Niemat and KJ would be like really welcoming to be in contact with people who ask questions. So feel free to do that now. To start, I have one. Could either of you speak a little bit about the future of the National Congress Party and the significance of the recent changes to leadership?
Well, The future of National Congress Party is one thing that I can say is that they have been living on lies, telling the people of Sudan something and that they do otherwise. And for the last 30 years, they did every ugly and horrible thing your mind can think of. And that the people of Sudan have been through this, like early on when we were talking about the genocide in Darfur, there's many Sudanese who don't believe. But today, the entire people of Sudan who are protesting, they're chanting that we are all Darfur. So the people understood. And then one thing to tell you, they use political Islam, they use religion to manipulate people's minds. But now people start their protest from inside the mosque. This is something never happened before in the Sudan. So sooner or later, they are done. I don't think they can be able to rule the Sudan anymore. It's about time. Right now, our problem is the international community is keeping the government of Sudan because they are economically unable to run the country. Politically, they are unable to run the country. Military-wise, they depend on mostly militias. Like nearly half of the Sudanese military are unwilling and they refuse to comply with the government order. But the police and the militias and the party militias that are undergroundly trained, they are the ones who do that. But right now, like anywhere in Sudan, whether by operation or election, they cannot win. And it's just about the time. And that's why we wanted people here to be able to be our voice and to be the voices for the people of Sudan, to communicate to the U.S. policymakers that it is important that the United States come early than later to be a part of bringing lasting peace to the people of Sudan, that this government, no matter what they do, even if they ship them people from the United States, they are no longer sustaining any ruling in Sudan.
Yeah, I think an unintentional consequence of sanctions being lifted. There was not very many of us Sudan activists who were in favor of the sanctions being lifted. However, once the sanctions were lifted, the NCP was no longer able to blame the economic crisis in the country on the sanctions. And so it kind of exposed them as being the ones who were corrupt and being the ones who were siphoning off funding for their own good and siphoning off money and not returning anything back to the Sudanese people. So that unintended consequence really uncovered the propaganda that many people outside of the regions who were actually being slaughtered by the government, so outside of Darfur, the ones outside of Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile region, many years the government had said, well, it's their fault, it's these people's faults. And when sanctions were lifted, it really exposed them. And so they've lost a lot of traction and support by what you would think of as like a moderate Sudanese who maybe really bought into the propaganda that it wasn't the government doing the killing in Darfur, it was these other groups. So that's an important point to make. But I agree with Niemat that it doesn't seem like they have as much support and probably have the least amount of support they've ever had since they took the country by coup in '89.
Cool. So we do have a question from Grace, which is, have other segments of Sudanese society protested atrocities in Darfur before? And if so, is the current engagement with the crisis different? So looking at more of a historical perspective on protests.
Can you repeat the first part of the question again? There was like breaking up aside.
Yeah, of course. So have other segments of Sudanese society protested atrocities before in Darfur?
I don't think so. It was like individuals, but you cannot say an entire community. Like Darfur was mostly on their own, but there are a few people who are northern, who are activists, who can like people involved at the level of being individual activists, but not the entire community. And what is different right now is that the entire people of Sudan, regardless of their ethnic, religious, or regional background, they have come together. They have one demand that they are no longer wanted the regime, and then they think this government has divided them, and now they are no longer wanted to allow the government to revise them by protesting and showing the government that we all can be Darfur, because what you do to us is just like what you have done to the people of Darfur, and that we are no longer divided as you divided us and killed the people of Darfur. So, and also this was going back to when the protests erupted, the government of Sudan immediately jumped into the national TV and they said, oh, these are like the Darfuri students and Darfuri who have been trained outside of the country in Israel and somewhere to come and stabilize our country. And then people said, no, we are all Darfur. So that was the message from the protest, to tell them that these are all lies and we can no longer be fooled by your lies.
Yeah, I think even here, you know, in California, I remember being in 2007, 2008, we here at the Los Angeles Federal Building, we would camp out, we would have a big tent and the Darfur would be on it, and we would be doing activism, and the larger Sudanese community never really engaged. But 3 weeks ago, they had a rally at the LA Federal Building, the exact same spot, and we went, and it was all people I had never seen before, because they weren't Darfuri, but they were Sudanese. And so they were from other parts of the country. Many of them might be first generation born here. And so their parents came over before. And they were, for the first time, really caring about the disruptions that were happening in their country. They were calling Bashir a genocider, and they were getting training. They were linking with the Armenian communities to learn about how to do lobbying and how to gain lobbying skills and where to go, how to go to Sacramento, and then how to go to DC to like talk to our senators and our representatives. And it was the first time where I had seen non-Darfuri Sudanese really activated in a way that they could try to influence politics here. And so that's been a change I've seen. That, I mean, as Niemat says, it really was like maybe a couple of people here and there, but the NCP and Bashir did a great job of pushing propaganda that that's the Darfur problem and that's them and they're doing it, and it really divided and conquered society. And now they're a little bit more woken up.
Great. And so for the final question, kind of will transition us into our closing thoughts, but for both of you, in the United States, where do you think we should be targeting domestic advocacy efforts?
For the domestic advocacy effort, I think targeting Congress, both like the House of Representatives and the Senate, will be very important. Like if your representatives can read a letter from you about Sudan and asking them to speak out about what is going on in Sudan is very important. Because right now, the Department of the State is still negotiating with Sudan. And in the last month, we had the special advisor, the national security advisor to the president, and also special advisor to Africa. At the Department of the State went to Sudan and was talking about the meeting was constructive, and then they will continue the conversation, which is dangerous. Like al-Bashir is now almost done, and we are about to have change in Sudan, and people are peacefully protesting. We don't want the United States to be the obstacle in between the Sudanese and like Sudanese dream for change, for peace. Because the United States for years has been seen as a government that unfortunately not following the American values or not the human rights norm that they have been breaching, but like clearly supporting the government of Sudan. And now I think like since there is the largest Sudanese movement and the excuse was in the past, it's just like people are divided and if Bashir left, who will come? And now anyways, the people of Sudan at the end of the day, they are going to move Bashir. But I would see that like the United States is a very powerful country. If the United States is supporting Sudan, then other like right now, Bashir's allies within the African Union, they did nothing. They're very quiet. They are sitting and watching. Within the Middle East, Bashir has traveled to Qatar, to Emirates, and they didn't get the support that they used to get in the past, which is something good. Everyone thinks this is the end of Bashir except the United States government. So that's very important that you guys, if you can mobilize your members and people at the grassroots level, if every single one, like this, what I said, that if you can get a letter in the mailboxes or emails of the members of Congress that like over 500 members and the Senate, that will make a difference. And to give you an example, in February, we went for meetings, and many offices within the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate and both the Senate and the House, they were very responsive, and then they show that they care, and they show the willingness that they are receptive, and that they also concerned about the situation as well as the U.S. government's role in Sudan. So if we can reach more people, we can definitely change that. And Congress has the opportunity to exercise pressure over the administration, but also writing and being outspoken that will also influence the administration, like shaming and naming, or also appealing to them publicly to the current administration by people writing letters to the editors, expressing their concern about the U.S. direction in Sudan. It's very, very important. And we do actually, I'm also hoping to get something more like of a resolution or a hearing, but we hope that we have a specific target. We may be able to directly reach out to people who are willing to help in that, maybe in another conversation, or our colleagues from Stand can reach out to you and see how we can help. It's also amplifying the voices of people on the ground, young people just like you, university students, college professors, people who have been teaching, doctors. Like, if you can mobilize this group profession to have them speak on behalf of others, if the students can speak for the students and bring this to their community members' attention, to the media in the local community or the national media. Right now, the international media has covered Sudan, BBC, Al Jazeera, and some other, but not the ABC, not CNN, not Fox, not local or national U.S. news. There was an article in the New York Times, and that was pretty much it. So we really want more like focus on that, and if with like current social media has been like really helpful in terms of amplifying the voice and bringing more attention. If you can be able to do that, that will definitely be very helpful to just exercising more public pressure, but also individually we can exercise pressure over our representatives. Since we vote for them, they need our vote. We should be able to assertively assert that and make it important that this is very important for us, and we want you to act upon it.
I think just to add to that, I would push you guys to really take the angle Niemat's discussing about the students representing students. That's the type of angle that you could really push out an op-ed through. So like if Niemat and I wrote about students protesting in Sudan, it's not as powerful as a student in the US discussing and pushing it out. And then at the bottom of it, you can check in with Niemat whenever it gets released about what the specific ask is. But I definitely suggest using op-eds and doing it locally, getting it into wherever your state senators or representatives might look at the news. So it could be on campus, but then it could also be the state paper, whatever's most widely read in the state. I also suggest if you are in front of a member of Congress, there should be coming up soon a letter by senators who are on the Foreign Relations Committee asking to make sure that we don't take Sudan off the state-sponsored terrorism list. It's just it's coming up in July. It's really, like, it could really make things go bad, as what Niemat is saying. The U.S. meddles in a lot of international foreign policies, and this is not one that we want to get involved in. We really want the Sudanese people and to support the Sudanese people from behind and let them rise up and let them do the things they need to do. And when they need help, they'll ask, and then we can help there. And I know one of those asks is to not take Bashir's regime off of the state-sponsored terrorism list. If elections go through and there is a new democratically supported leader and party, that would be a perfect opportunity to say, okay, let's start from scratch. Like, let's start from the beginning. So we want to keep that leverage until Bashir is fully gone, and we can really start over with somebody who's democratically supported. So use your leverage as students, and check in with Niemat, because it is an evolving situation for political asks. So if you find yourself either submitting an op-ed or in front of a member of Congress, check in to see if the hearing has been organized by the Darfur Women Action Group or another organization, and then always push that we don't want to take Sudan off the state-sponsored terrorism list. That is our only piece of leverage to support a new democratically elected party in Sudan.
A short explanation why it is important that Katie mentioned taking Sudan list is the name from the terrorist sponsor list. That will give, if that happens, will give Sudan a huge opportunity to be able to trade internationally and buying weapons from any country, including the United States, from the United States. And then also they will conduct international transactions, they can conduct investment, and most importantly, they have over $50 billion that they have accumulated of debt that accumulated from the United States. If that happens, then they will be that will be forbidden, and they will use all that money to buy more weapons, oppress more people, and stay forever in Sudan. So that's very important just to understand, if you say why that is very important. And also, don't forget, check us on our Women Action Group whenever you have a chance. We have a Stand with Sudan campaign that is up and running, so we definitely be more than happy and feel free to email us or reach out to our partners from Stand. We definitely be more than happy to work with you and help the Sudanese people to bring their voices to the policy implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think with that, we're going to roll into our conclusion. And on the topic of advocacy, Stan does have one core ask, and we want to convey what you can do to support civil society in their calls for peace and justice. So Stan's core ask is to urge your congressional members to release a statement on ongoing protests and current events in Sudan. This will be done through writing a letter and posting it on social media. So in a follow-up email, we do have a template for this letter. And again, this is simply taking a picture, posting it to social media, and tagging your representatives to ensure visibility and awareness do follow. So I think with that, we are done with our webinar. So thank you to both of our speakers, Katie J. Scott and Niemat Ahmadi. We greatly appreciate your time and your insight on the situation. And thank you to our participants. So yeah, there's nothing else.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was my pleasure to speak to you this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.